with guilt about how hard it was to ask family for money. We gave her thousands over the years, tens of thousands probably. I never kept track because I didn't want to think of my daughter as a debt. Tom never asked for anything. Sarah called on birthdays and holidays, but she'd built her own life and was proud to be independent. Only Linda needed constant rescuing. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was watching Robert's face every time she called with a new crisis. He loved her, but I could see the disappointment growing. Near the end, when the cancer was bad and he was too weak to argue with anyone, Linda would call during his treatment sessions asking for money. "Can't this wait?" I'd whisper into the phone, watching my husband sleep fitfully in his hospital bed. "Mom, they're going to repossess Craig's truck if we don't pay by Friday. Do you want your grandchildren to watch their father's truck get towed away?" Even dying, Robert wrote her a check. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Now, sitting in his chair at 3 a.m, I finally let myself see the truth I'd been avoiding for 39 years. Linda didn't love us. Linda used us. And now that Robert was gone, she was planning to use his death to take everything we'd built together. That meeting wasn't about fair division of family property. It was about Linda positioning herself to grab the most valuable assets while making me feel guilty for wanting to keep my own home. The kennel comment wasn't a moment of cruelty. It was Linda showing me who she really was, because she thought I was too weak and too grief-stricken to fight back. I got up and walked to Robert's desk in his study. He'd been meticulous about keeping records, and I'd avoided going through his papers because it felt too final. But now I needed to understand exactly what we owned and what it was worth. The first thing I found was a folder labeled Property, Appraisals. Inside were documents from last year that made my breath catch. A local developer had contacted Robert about purchasing our land. They wanted to build a shopping complex on the highway side of our property. The appraisal estimated our land at nearly $2 million. $2 million. I sat down hard in Robert's chair. We'd always known the land was valuable, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. Linda had talked about the house being worth $300,000, but the land beneath it was worth so much more. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A second letter from the same developer dated just 2 weeks ago, after Robert's death. They were still interested in purchasing the property, and they'd heard it might be available due to family circumstances. How could they have heard that? Robert had been in the hospital, then died. I hadn't talked to any developers, but someone had. Someone who knew Robert was gone and that the property might be for sale. I rifled through more papers and found Robert's phone records from the last month of his life. There, highlighted in yellow ink in Robert's careful handwriting, were 3 calls to Linda's number. Long calls, 15 and 20 minutes each. My hands were shaking as I found Robert's personal notes. In his methodical way, he'd written down important conversations. The last entry, dated a week before he died, simply said, "Told Linda about developer interest." She asked many questions about timeline and paperwork. Linda knew. She'd known about the developer's interest when she walked into my kitchen demanding quick division of the property. She'd known about the $2 million value when she suggested I live in a kennel. She wasn't just trying to steal my home, she was trying to steal a fortune. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of Robert's desk drawer, I found a copy of a credit application. Linda's name, Craig's name, and at the bottom, listed as collateral. Inheritance interest in Holloway family property. Estimated value $650,000. She'd already used her inheritance as collateral for a loan. Before Robert was even dead, she'd been borrowing money against property that wasn't hers yet. I sat back in Robert's chair, finally understanding the urgency behind Linda's demands. She didn't just want the property, she needed it. She owed money, using it as collateral, and if she didn't get her hands on her share soon, she'd be in serious trouble. The kennel comment wasn't just cruelty. It was desperation. But Linda had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same pushover mother who'd been bailing her out for 39 years. She'd assumed grief had made me weak and malleable. She was wrong. Grief had made me clear-sighted. For the first time in decades, I picked up the phone to call my lawyer, then put it down. Not yet. First, I needed to know exactly how deep Linda's deception went, and I needed to understand all my options before I made my move. Because Linda was right about one thing. This was about being practical. I was just going to be practical. In a way she never saw coming. The next morning, I called in sick to the part-time job I'd taken at the local library. For the first time in my life, I needed to think like Linda. I needed to understand exactly what she was planning and how deep her deception went. I started with the credit application I'd found. The loan was from First National Bank, the same bank where Linda had worked as a teller 15 years ago. She still knew people there, people who might give her information they shouldn't share. I drove to town and sat in my car across from the bank for 20 minutes, gathering courage. When I finally walked inside, I asked to speak with the loan officer about my family's property. The young man who met with me was professional but nervous when I explained my situation. Mrs. Holloway, I can't discuss specific customer information, but I can tell you that any loan using property as collateral requires the property owner's signature. If someone listed an inheritance they don't yet possess as collateral, that would be problematic. Problematic how? He shifted uncomfortably. It could be considered fraud, depending on how the application was filled out. Fraud. The word hit me like a physical blow. My daughter hadn't just manipulated me emotionally. She'd potentially committed a crime using my family's property. When I got home, I called my oldest friend, Betty Morrison. Betty had been the county clerk for 30 years before retiring. If anyone knew about property records and legal procedures, it would be her. Margaret, honey, I'm so sorry about Robert, she said when I called. What can I do for you? Betty, I need to understand something about property ownership. If someone applies for a loan using an inheritance as collateral, but the person who would leave the inheritance is still alive, is that legal? There was a long pause. Oh, Margaret, what's Linda done now? Betty had known my children since they were babies. She'd seen Linda's pattern of behavior play out in the small town where everyone knew everyone's business. I found papers, I admitted. She's borrowed money against Robert's property. Before he died, the application is dated 3 months ago. Robert was still alive but very sick. Betty was quiet for a moment. Margaret, you need to understand something. If Linda listed an inheritance she didn't actually have legal right to yet, and if she didn't disclose that the property owner was still alive, that's fraud. Plain and simple. What should I do? First, you need to find out how much money she borrowed and what the terms are. Then you need a lawyer, a good one. After hanging up with Betty, I sat at my kitchen table trying to process everything. Linda hadn't just been manipulating me for money over the years. She'd been preparing for this moment, planning to cash in on Robert's death before he was even gone. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Linda's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice artificially cheerful. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was stressed about the property division, and I said something I didn't mean. I gripped the phone tighter. The kennel comment. Yes, that was terrible of me. I've been thinking about it all night. You know I love you, right? The manipulation was so obvious now that I wondered how I'd ever fallen for it before. What do you want, Linda? I want to make things right. I talked to Craig last night, and we think you're absolutely right to want to keep the house. We can work around that. Work around it how? Well, what if we sold just the back 40 acres? The ones that face the highway. That would give us enough money to split 3 ways, and you could keep the house and the rest of the land. The highway-facing acres, the exact land the developer wanted for the shopping complex. Linda was trying to get me to sell the most valuable part of the property while thinking I was getting a good deal. How do you know those acres would be worth enough to make the division worthwhile? I asked carefully. Oh, I just figured land near the highway would be more valuable. You know, for commercial development or whatever. She was lying so smoothly, so casually. How many times had she lied to me over the years while I believed every word? I need time to think about it, I said. Of course, Mom, but we shouldn't wait. Too long. Property values can change, and we want to get the best price while the market is good. After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone. Linda was panicking. She needed to liquidate part of the property quickly to cover whatever loan she'd taken out, and she was trying to manipulate me into selling the exact acres that would give her the most money. But she'd made another mistake. She'd assumed I didn't know about the developer's interest. She was counting on my ignorance to pull off her scheme. I decided it was time to stop being ignorant. During the land division, my daughter said, "You should live in a kennel. At least there, someone would listen to you bark." I closed the folder. And when she got the lawyer's letter and didn't see her name, my phone rang over 100 times. But let me start from the beginning, because that wasn't just a cruel comment. It was the moment I realized my own daughter had been planning to destroy me all along. My name is Margaret, and I'm 65 years old. 3 months ago, my husband Robert passed away after a long battle with cancer. For 42 years, we built our life together on the 150 acres of farmland his grandfather left us. Robert always said the land would be our children's security, their future. I believed him. I believed in family. After the funeral, when the grief was still raw and the house felt impossibly empty, I knew I had to face the inevitable conversation about dividing the property. We had 3 children: Linda, 39, my middle daughter and always the most demanding; Tom, 35, quiet but dependable; and Sarah, 31, who moved to Oregon years ago and rarely calls. I spent weeks preparing for this meeting. I organized every document, every deed, every tax record. I wanted everything to be fair, clean, transparent. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. Linda arrived first, as she always did. She walked into my kitchen like she owned it, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor that Robert and I had installed ourselves 20 years ago. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I was doing. She went straight to the coffee pot and poured herself a cup without asking. "Mom, we need to talk about getting this property divided quickly," she said, not even looking at me. "I've been thinking about this, and honestly, you don't need to keep living in this big house. It's too much for you to maintain." Tom arrived. 15 minutes later, apologizing for being late. He'd driven straight from his construction job, still wearing his work clothes, dirt under his fingernails. He gave me a gentle hug and asked if I needed anything. The contrast between my children was always stark, but that day it felt like a chasm. Sarah joined us by phone, her voice crackling through the speaker. She sounded distracted, probably dealing with her own kids in the background. I spread all the documents across the dining table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of family meals. The property was substantial: the main house where Robert and I lived, the smaller farmhouse where Tom and his family currently rented, the barn and several outbuildings, all sitting on prime agricultural land. "I've been thinking," I began carefully, "about how to divide this fairly among the 3 of you while still allowing me to live comfortably for my remaining years." Linda's eyes sharpened. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming on the table. "What exactly are you thinking, Mom?" "Well, I thought I could keep the main house and maybe 10 acres around it. That would leave 140 acres to split between you 3. The farmhouse would go to Tom since he's already living there, and absolutely not." Linda's voice cut through the air like a blade. "That's not fair at all." I blinked, startled by her vehemence. "What do you mean? You keeping the main house and the best 10 acres? Mom, that house is worth at least $300,000, and those are the most valuable acres on the property. We'd be getting scraps while you hoard the prime real estate." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Linda, Mom just lost Dad. She needs somewhere to live." "She can live anywhere," Linda snapped. "She doesn't need the biggest house on the best land. She's one person. We have families to think about." I felt my chest tighten. "Linda, this has been my home for over 40 years. I raised you children here. Your father died in the bedroom upstairs?" "That's exactly why you shouldn't stay," she said, her voice taking on a fake gentle tone that I'd learned to recognize as her most dangerous. "It's too full of memories. Too sad. You'd be better off in a smaller place, somewhere you can start fresh." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. "Maybe Linda has a point, Mom. The house is really big for just you." I looked at Tom, hoping for support, but he was studying his hands. He never liked confrontation, especially with Linda. "But where would I go?" I asked, feeling foolish for even having to ask. Linda's face lit up with what she probably thought was a helpful expression. "There are lots of options. Senior communities, those nice little apartments in town. You could even rent something month to month until you figure out what you want." The word rent hit me like a physical blow. After 42 years of building a life, she wanted me to become a renter in my old age. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Why can't we find a way for everyone to be happy? I'm not trying to cheat anyone out of their inheritance." "It's not about cheating," Linda said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "It's about being practical. You're 65, Mom. How many more years do you really think you'll live in that big house? 10? 15 at most? Why should prime property sit unused when we could be building our futures?" The casual way she calculated my remaining years made me feel sick. "I think Mom should be able to stay in her house," Tom said quietly, finally, finding his voice. Linda whirled on him. Of course you think that. You're getting the farmhouse either way. You don't care if Mom takes the best part of the land because you're not losing anything. That's not true, Tom protested. But Linda was already continuing. The fair thing would be to sell everything and split the money 4 ways. Mom gets her share and the 3 of us get ours. Clean and simple. 4 ways? I felt dizzy. You want me to sell my home and then only get 1/4 of the proceeds? You'd be getting exactly what you're entitled to, Linda said. 1/4. Same as the rest of us. But I'm your mother. This is my home. Linda's expression hardened, and that's when she said it. You should live in a kennel. At least there, someone would listen to you bark. The words hung in the air like poison. Tom gasped. Sarah went quiet on the phone. Even Linda seemed momentarily stunned by her own cruelty. I closed the folder containing all the documents I'd so carefully prepared. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I think this meeting is over. Mom, I didn't mean, Linda started, but I was already standing. Please leave my house. As my children filed out, I stood at the window watching Linda's luxury SUV disappear down the gravel driveway. Something had broken inside me, but it wasn't what Linda probably expected. It wasn't my spirit or my resolve. It was the last thread of blindness that had kept me from seeing who my daughter really was. That night, alone in the house that had witnessed my entire adult life, I made a decision. Linda wanted to play games. With the family land? Fine. But she was about to learn that I knew how to play too. And unlike her, I played to win. The night after Linda's kennel comment, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, but more than that, I kept thinking about the look in her eyes when she said them. There was no surprise, no immediate regret. It was calculated cruelty, and that terrified me more than the insult itself. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Robert's old recliner, the one I'd been avoiding since his death. The house felt different now, not just empty, but somehow violated. Linda had walked through these rooms like a predator sizing up territory. That's when the memories started flooding back. Not the good ones I usually let myself remember, but the ones I'd been pushing down for years. Linda was 7 when she broke her brother Tom's toy truck, then told me Tom had done it himself to get attention. When I scolded Tom, she watched from the doorway with that same calculating look. Even at 7, she understood the power of lies. At 12, she convinced me that her teacher had lost her homework assignment. I marched into that school ready to defend my daughter, only to discover she'd never turned anything in. The teacher's embarrassed face when she showed me Linda's empty assignment folder still haunts me. High school was worse. Linda learned to use tears as weapons. She'd cry about being misunderstood, about how her siblings got more attention, about how unfair life was. Robert and I would bend over backwards to make her happy, giving her extra privileges, extra money, extra chances. Nothing was ever enough. When she was 17, she forged my signature on a credit card application, maxed it out buying clothes and makeup. When the bill came, she sobbed in my arms about how peer pressure had forced her into it, how she was ashamed, how she'd learned her lesson. Robert wanted to press charges. I convinced him to let it go. She's our daughter, I told him. Family forgives. I paid that credit card bill. $3,000 we didn't have. The pattern was always the same. Linda would take something, money, trust, peace of mind, then play the victim when consequences arrived. And I would rescue her, because that's what mothers do. When she married Craig, I thought maybe having her own family would change her. I was wrong. It just gave her new ways to manipulate us. Mom, Craig lost his job, she called to tell me 2 years into their marriage. We might lose the house. Could you? And Dad help with the mortgage payment? Just this once? Of course we helped. Just this once became 6 months of payments until Craig mysteriously found new employment. When their first baby came, Linda needed help with medical bills. When their second arrived, she needed money for a bigger car. When they decided to renovate their kitchen, she needed a loan for materials. Every request came with tears, with promises to pay us back, The developer's name was on the letters I'd found, Peninsula Development Group. Their office was in the county seat, about an hour's drive. I'd never done anything like this before, but I called and asked for a meeting. We're very interested in discussing the Holloway property, the receptionist said when I explained who I was. Mr. Patterson has been hoping to hear from your family. The next day, I drove to their office wearing my best dress and the pearl. necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look like a serious property owner, not a grieving widow who could be taken advantage of. James Patterson was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His office was professional but not ostentatious. Mrs. Holloway, first let me express my condolences on your husband's passing. Robert spoke with us several times, and he seemed like a wonderful man. Thank you. I'm here because I found your correspondence in his papers, and I want to understand what you're proposing. Of course, he pulled out a thick folder. We're looking to develop a retail complex on the highway-facing portion of your property, about 40 acres. We've done extensive market research, and that location is ideal for our needs. What kind of money are we talking about? For 40 acres, we'd be prepared to offer $1.2 million. $2 million for just the highway acres. Linda had been planning to convince me to sell the most valuable part of our property while making me think I was being generous to let her have a share. That's a substantial amount, I managed to say. It is. Your property is uniquely positioned. Highway access, the right zoning potential, close enough to town but not too close. We've been looking for a site like this for 2 years. Mr. Patterson, I have to ask, have you spoken with anyone else in my family about this property? He looked uncomfortable. Your daughter Linda called us about 3 weeks ago. She said the family was interested in selling and asked about our timeline for closing. What did you tell her? I told her we'd need to work directly with the property owner, which I understood to be you, as Robert's widow. She said she was just gathering information for the family. Linda had been talking to the developer, probably trying to figure out how quickly she could get her hands on the money. She'd been working multiple angles while I was grieving my husband's death. Mr. Patterson, I'm not ready to make any decisions today, but I appreciate your time and information. Of course, please take all the time you need. We're committed to this project, so our offer will remain open. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: power. For the first time since Robert's diagnosis, I held all the cards. I knew about the developer's offer. I knew about Linda's fraud. I knew about her desperate need for quick money. Linda thought she was manipulating a grief-stricken old woman who would be grateful for her daughter's guidance. Instead, she was about to face a mother who finally understood exactly who she was dealing with. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. Linda's voice more urgent than before. Mom, I've been thinking more about the property division. Could we meet tomorrow? I have some ideas that might work better for everyone. I smiled as I deleted the message. Oh, we'd definitely be meeting. Soon. But not to discuss Linda's ideas. It was time for Linda to learn what happened when you tried to steal from someone who'd finally stopped being a victim. I spent the weekend planning. Not grieving, not feeling sorry for myself, but planning with the kind of cold precision that Linda had been using against me for years. By Monday morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. My first call was to James Patterson at Peninsula Development. Mr. Patterson, this is Margaret Holloway. I've made a decision about your offer. Wonderful. I hope we can work something out. I want to accept your offer for the 40 highway acres, $1.2 million. But I have specific conditions about how and when this transaction takes place. There was a pause. What kind of conditions? I want the sale to close as quickly as possible, within 2 weeks if that's feasible, and I want the payment terms structured in a very particular way. I'm listening. I want the money divided into 4 separate payments. 3 payments of $300,000 each and 1 payment of $600,000. Each payment should be made to different recipients according to instructions I'll provide. That's unusual, but not impossible. May I ask why? Family estate planning purposes. I want to ensure my children receive their inheritance in a way that's most beneficial for their individual situations. It wasn't entirely a lie. Linda's situation was about to become very unique indeed. We can accommodate that request. When would you like to schedule the closing? As soon as your lawyers can prepare the paperwork. My next call was to Thomas Morrison, Betty's son who'd taken over much of the legal practice in town when the old lawyer retired. Tom Morrison had handled Robert's will and knew our family situation. Margaret, I'm so sorry for your loss. What can I do for you? Tom, I need your help with something complicated. I'm selling part of the property, and I need the transaction structured in a very specific way. I also need you to help me understand my options regarding a potential fraud situation involving Linda. Fraud? Margaret, you'd better come in so we can talk properly. That afternoon, I sat in Tom Morrison's office explaining everything I'd discovered. He listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally shaking his head. Margaret, what Linda did with that loan application is definitely fraud if she misrepresented the status of the property. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges. Not yet. I want to see how she handles what I'm about to do first. What are you planning? I explained my idea. Tom Morrison's eyebrows rose higher and higher as I spoke. Well, it's completely legal, but it's also brilliantly ruthless. Are you sure you want to do this? Linda taught me that family loyalty is a one-way street. She's been taking advantage of that for 39 years. It's time she learned what happens when the street runs the other direction. All right, let me draft the paperwork. While Tom Morrison prepared the legal documents, I made my third call of the day. To Linda. Mom. Her voice was bright with false enthusiasm. I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have the perfect solution. For the property division. Actually, Linda, I've been doing some thinking too. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. Could you come to the house around 10? Of course. I'm so excited to work this out together. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to stop being Linda's victim and start being her consequence. The next morning, Linda arrived exactly on time, carrying a folder and wearing the kind of fake smile she'd perfected over the years. She hugged me at the door, a performance of affection for an audience of one. Mom, you look so much better than last week. I think getting this property situation resolved is going to be great for your peace of mind. We sat at the same dining table where she'd humiliated me days earlier. Linda spread out papers from her folder. I've been working on a proposal that I think will make everyone happy, she began. What if we sell the back 40 acres to a developer and split that money 3 ways? You keep the house and the rest of the land, and Tom, Sarah, and I each get about $400,000. Everyone wins. She was still lying about the property value, still trying to manipulate me into thinking I was getting a generous deal. That's interesting, I said calmly. What made you think there might be developers interested in the back 40? Oh, just common sense. Highway frontage is always valuable for commercial development. I nodded thoughtfully. Linda, I have something to tell you. I've already sold those 40 acres. Her face went white. What? When? To whom? Peninsula Development Group. They offered $1.2 million. Not the $1.2 million you were expecting me to think it was worth about $400,000 per child. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You sold it without discussing it with us, just like you borrowed money against it without discussing it with me. The color drained completely from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Linda, I found the loan application. You used your inheritance of this property as collateral for a $150,000 loan 3 months ago, while your father was dying. She started to cry. But these weren't the manipulative tears I'd seen so many times before. These were tears of genuine panic. Mom, I can explain. Craig lost his job again and we were going to lose the house. I knew Dad was sick, and I thought it would be okay because I'd inherit enough to pay it back. You thought you'd inherit enough because you knew about the developer's offer. You talked to them. You talked to Dad about it while he was in the hospital. Linda's sobs became harder. I was desperate. We owe so much money, and the loan is due next month. If I don't pay it back, they'll take our house. For a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of maternal sympathy. Then I remembered the kennel comment, and the feeling passed. Linda, the sale is final. The money will be distributed according to my instructions. What instructions? How much am I getting? I pulled out the papers Tom Morrison had prepared. Tom and Sarah will each receive $300,000. That's their inheritance from their father. What about me? What about my $300,000? I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd spent nearly 4 decades taking advantage of my love and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Your $300,000 is going directly to First National Bank to pay off the fraudulent loan you took out against property you didn't own. Linda's face crumpled. No, you can't do that. That money was mine. That was my inheritance. Your inheritance was your share of your father's property. You spent it before you inherited it. Now it's gone. But the loan, if I don't pay the loan, we'll lose everything. Craig doesn't know about it. He'll leave me. The kids. You should have thought about that before you decided I should live in a kennel. Linda stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're really going to destroy my family over something I said when I was upset? Linda, I'm not destroying your family. I'm refusing to save you from destroying it yourself. There's a difference. She sat in silence for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. When she spoke again, her voice was small and broken. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to figure it out yourself, like everyone else does when they make mistakes. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll never ask you for money again. Just please don't do this. I looked at this woman who'd manipulated me for 39 years and felt something I'd never felt before. Complete immunity to her manipulation. The papers are already signed, Linda. The bank will receive their payment next week. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. This isn't over. I'll contest this. I'll sue you. That money is rightfully mine. You're welcome to try. Tom Morrison has all the documentation of your fraudulent loan application. I'm sure the district attorney would be very interested in seeing it. Linda's face went from red to ashen in seconds. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back one last time. I hate you, she said. I know, I replied. You always have. The difference is, I don't care anymore. After she left, I sat in the sudden quiet of my house. No shouting, no manipulation, no tears. Just peace. My phone was already ringing. It would ring many times over the next few days. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to answer. The first call came 30 minutes after Linda left. I let it ring. The second came 10 minutes later, then the third. By evening, my answering machine was full. I poured myself a glass of the wine Robert and I had been saving for a special occasion. If watching my manipulative daughter face the consequences of her own actions wasn't special, I didn't know what was. The messages started desperate and quickly turned vicious. Mom, please pick up. I know you're there. We need to talk about this. Please. Then, this is ridiculous, Mom. You're being cruel and vindictive. Dad would be ashamed of you. Then, you're destroying my children's future over a stupid comment. What kind of grandmother are you? Finally. I hope you're happy. I hope you enjoy being alone for the rest of your life, because that's what you've chosen. I deleted each one without feeling a twinge of guilt. Linda had made her choices. Now she was living with them. The next day brought a new strategy. Craig called. Margaret, Linda told me what happened. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Craig, who'd been living off my family's generosity for years without ever acknowledging it, was going to lecture me about misunderstandings. Hello, Craig. What exactly do you think you understand? Linda said you're angry about something she said during a family meeting. Look, she speaks without thinking sometimes, but she loves you. This whole property thing has gotten out of hand. Craig, did Linda tell you about the $150,000 loan she took out against property she didn't own? Silence. Did she mention that she's been talking to developers behind my back for months, trying to sell land while Robert was dying? More silence. I didn't think so. Craig, your wife committed fraud. The only reason she's not in jail is because I paid off her debt. I'd suggest you start asking her some harder questions about your family's finances. Margaret, wait, I hung up. The calls intensified over the next few days. Linda recruited relatives I hadn't heard from in years. My sister called from Florida. Margaret. Honey, I just got off the phone with Linda. She's devastated. She said you've cut her out of Robert's inheritance over a family argument. Did she tell you she used Robert's property as collateral for a gambling debt while he was in the hospital? Gambling debt? Linda said Craig lost his job and they needed help with the mortgage. My sister Linda has been lying to you just like she's been lying to me for 40 years. Craig works for the county. He's never lost his job. Linda has a gambling problem, and she's been funding it with other people's money. Another relative discovered the truth and stopped calling. By the end of the week, the messages changed tone. Again. Now Linda was trying to bargain. Mom, what if I paid you back? I could get a second mortgage on our house and pay you back the $300,000 over time. With interest. Would that work? She still didn't understand. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about respect and consequences, and the simple fact that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. But Linda's desperation was growing. and desperate people do dangerous things. On Friday evening, I came home from grocery shopping to find Linda's car in my driveway. She was sitting on my front porch with her 2 children, my grandchildren, ages 8 and 10. She'd brought them as weapons. "Grandma," little Emma ran to me as I got out of the car. "Mommy said you're mad at her and that's why we can't come visit anymore." My heart clenched. These children had nothing to do with their mother's choices, but Linda was using them anyway. "Hi, sweetie," I said, hugging Emma. "I'm not mad at you or your brother, not ever." Linda stood up, her face puffy from crying. "Mom, can we please talk? The kids miss you. They don't understand why they can't see their grandmother anymore. Linda, you know exactly why we can't have a normal relationship anymore. Please, just 5 minutes. For the kids." I looked at Emma and Sam, these innocent children who were being used as pawns in their mother's manipulation game. I made a decision that surprised even me. "Kids, would you like to help me feed the chickens out back?" While Emma and Sam scattered feed for the chickens, delighted to have a job, Linda and I stood by the fence, far enough away that the children couldn't hear us, close enough that they could see everything was okay. "I'm desperate, Mom," Linda said without preamble. "The bank is calling every day. Craig found out about the loan. He's talking about divorce. The kids don't know what's happening, but they can feel that everything's falling apart. Linda, I told you what would happen if you kept taking advantage of this family." When? When did you ever tell me that? I thought about it. She was right. I'd never set boundaries. I'd never said no. I'd enabled her behavior for so long that she'd come to see it as her right. You're right. I never told you. I just kept rescuing you instead of letting you face consequences. That was my mistake, so you can fix it. You can rescue me one more time. No, Linda, I can't. And even if I could, I wouldn't. She started crying again, but these tears seemed genuine. What am I going to do? I don't know how to fix this. For the first time in our conversation, I felt a hint of the old maternal sympathy. Not enough to change my mind, but enough to give her something I'd never given her before. Honest advice. Linda, you're 39 years old. You're intelligent and capable when you choose to be. You can get a job. A real job that pays real money. You can sell your house and buy something smaller. You can face your gambling problem and get help for it. You can learn to live within your means instead of constantly looking for someone else to bail you out. But it's so hard, starting over at my age. Linda, I'm 65 years old, and I'm starting over. My husband is dead, my daughter hates me, and I'm learning to build a life that doesn't revolve around other people's problems. If I can do it, you can do it. She was quiet for a long moment, watching her children chase the chickens around the yard. "I really do hate you right now," she said softly. "I know, but someday, if you actually grow up, you might understand that I did this. Because I finally decided to love you enough to stop enabling you." That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, maybe, but it's the truth. Linda called the children back to the car. Emma hugged me goodbye and whispered, "Mommy's been crying a lot lately." "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to figure out hard things, and that makes them sad for a while." "Will you still be my grandma?" "Always, baby. No matter what." After they left, I went inside and found 17 more messages on my answering machine. Not just from Linda this time, but from Craig, from various relatives, from people I barely knew who'd heard Linda's version of the story. But there was one message that made me smile. Tom Morrison, my lawyer. "Margaret, the closing went through perfectly. The bank has been paid, and the remaining funds have been distributed to Tom and Sarah as you requested. Congratulations, you've successfully completed one of the most elegant pieces of legal revenge I've ever witnessed." I played the message again, then saved it. That night, I disconnected my answering machine and unplugged my landline phone. I kept my cell phone for emergencies, but I changed the number. Linda would keep trying to contact me, keep trying to manipulate me back into being her safety net, but I was done being available for it. For the first time in 40 years, when Linda had a crisis, she was going to have to solve it herself. The silence in my house was deeper than it had been since Robert died. But it wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace. Tomorrow, I was going to start living the life I'd spent 65 years postponing while I took care of other people's problems. And Linda was going to start learning what the rest of the world already knew. That actions have consequences, and some mistakes can't be fixed by crying to your mother. 6 months later, I was planting roses in the garden of my new home. Not the sprawling farmhouse where I'd raised my children, but a comfortable 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town with a view of the mountains and neighbors who didn't know my history. I'd sold the remaining 110 acres to a young farming family for exactly what it was worth. No games, no manipulation, just an honest transaction with honest people who would love the land the way Robert and I had. The peace I'd found wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of self-respect. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Mom, Sarah and I want to take you to dinner Sunday. The new Italian place?" I smiled and typed back, "I'd love that." Tom had been calling regularly since he'd received his inheritance, not asking for anything, just checking on me. He'd apologized for not standing up to Linda during that awful meeting, and we'd had honest conversations about family dynamics that we should have had years ago. Sarah had flown out from Oregon a month after the property sale. She'd been shocked to learn what Linda had done, but not surprised. "I moved across the country to get away from her drama," she'd told me. "I should have protected you better." "You protected yourself," I'd replied. "That was the smart thing to do." Now Sarah called every week, and we were planning a visit to Oregon in the fall. I was going to meet my grandchildren there, the ones Linda had never used as emotional weapons. As I worked in my garden, my neighbor Mrs. Chen came over with a pitcher of lemonade. She was a widow too, about my age, and we'd become friends without the complicated history that family relationships carried. "Margaret, you have a visitor," she said, nodding toward the street. I looked up to see Linda's car parked at the curb. My stomach tightened instinctively, but not with the old fear and guilt. This was just wariness, the way you'd feel seeing a snake in your garden. Dangerous if you weren't careful, but manageable if you kept your distance. Linda got out of the car slowly. She looked older, thinner, worn down in a way that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She walked up my driveway with none of her old confidence. "Hello, Mom? Linda?" I didn't stop working with my roses. "What do you want?" "I wanted to tell you something." Her voice was different, quieter, less demanding. I waited. I got a job at the insurance company downtown. It's just data entry, but it's full-time with benefits. Good for you. Craig and I are getting divorced. It's almost final. I looked up at her then. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Really?" "I'm sorry your children are going through that. Divorce is hard on kids." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I'm renting a small apartment near their school. They stay with me every other week." "How are they adjusting?" "Better than I expected." "Emma asked about you last week. She wanted to know if you still had the chickens." My heart tugged, but I didn't respond. Linda sat down on my porch steps without being invited. "I lost the house, just like you said I would. What did you expect would happen? I guess I expected you to save me, like you always did." I set down my garden shears and really looked at my daughter. She seemed smaller somehow, less dangerous. "Linda, why are you here?" "I wanted you to know that I understand now. What you did. Why you did it." "Do you?" "I spent 39 years taking from this family and giving nothing back. I used your love against you, and I taught my children that's how families work. That's not how families should work." I was quiet, waiting to see if this was another manipulation or something genuine. "I'm in therapy," she continued. "Court-ordered because of the gambling. But I'm learning things about myself, about how I treated you and Dad." "What kinds of things?" "That I never learned to solve my own problems because I always knew you'd solve them for me. That I never respected you because I never faced consequences for not respecting you. That I was angry at you for enabling me, even though I was the one who demanded to be enabled." These were words I'd never heard from Linda before. Not promises to do better, not apologies designed to get something, but actual understanding. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About everything." I sat down, on the porch steps beside her, not too close, but near enough to talk. "Linda, I made mistakes too. I should have set boundaries years ago. I should have let you face consequences when you were young enough to learn from them more easily. Why didn't you?" "Because I confused enabling with love. I thought protecting you from your mistakes was the same as caring about you." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a hawk circle over the distant mountains. "The kids ask about you," Linda said finally. "What do you tell them?" "The truth. That Mommy made some bad choices and hurt Grandma's feelings, and now we're all learning how to do better." That's a good answer. Could they? Could they visit you sometime? Not with me necessarily. Maybe Tom could bring them. I thought about Emma and Sam, innocent casualties of their mother's choices. They deserve to know their grandmother, and I deserve to know them. I'd like that. Linda stood up to leave. Mom? Yes? Thank you. For what? For finally loving me enough to let me fail. After she left, I went back to my roses. Mrs. Chen, who'd been discreetly watering her own flowers, came over. Was that your daughter? The one who gave you all the trouble? Yes. She looks different than I expected. Different. How? Smaller, sadder, more real, I guess. That evening, I called Tom. Your sister came to see me today. How did that go? Better than I expected. She's changed. Or at least, she's changing. Are you going to let her back into your life? Slowly. Carefully, with very clear boundaries. But maybe, yes. Mom, you don't have to fix everyone. I know, sweetheart. I'm not trying to fix Linda. I'm just willing to give her a chance to fix herself. That night, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars appear over the mountains. For 40 years, I'd lived for other people's needs, other people's crises, other people's approval. I'd lost myself in the process. The woman who'd been humiliated at that property division meeting 6 months ago was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know. A woman who could say no, who could set boundaries, who could love people without rescuing them. Linda's cruel words had been meant to destroy me. Instead, they'd freed me. Sometimes the last word isn't spoken. Sometimes it's lived. I'd found mine in this quiet cottage, in this peaceful garden, in the simple act of choosing myself for the first time in my life. Linda could have all the apologies and explanations she wanted. I had something better. I had peace, and the rest of my life to enjoy it. The phone rang inside the house. It might be Tom, or Sarah, or Mrs. Chen checking on me. People who cared about me without expecting me to fix their problems in return. I decided to let it ring. Whatever it was, could wait. I had stars to watch and tea to finish and roses to plan for tomorrow. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. In a life I'd built for myself, surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them. Linda had been wrong about the kennel. I'd found my voice and people were finally listening, but more importantly, I was finally worth listening to.